Welcome back to Terribly Honest with David Tenson. If you're tuning in for the first time, I record this while I'm going for a walk. Very a la natural, no editing. You will hear cars, birds, landscapes, soundscapes, and all kinds of things as I go for my morning walk. It has been a while since my last one. I have had a massive October. The last 4 weeks have been really large. Had a friend's wedding, which was wonderful. I was on the bridal party for that. Great to celebrate their marriage with them and hang out with the groomsmen. But weddings are always a lot to be part of, and preparation, etc., travel. At university we had a research conference which I volunteered to help with, so that's quite a large week. Managed to win a digital poster competition in my category for my research around AI and doctoral studies and doctoral assessment. Yesterday at work we had a memorial service, which we do once a year around All Saints Day, for everybody in the aged care facility that has passed away in the last 12 months. It's kind of a remembrance service, and we invite family, friends and relatives to come and celebrate their lives, mourn together and reconnect. So we had 46 people to remember, 46 deaths. Speaking of deaths, also held a death cafe, our second death cafe at the university. Just a whole lot of stuff. Also my second eldest, my middle child, finished high school, graduated. He started a new job as well, and it's just been a lot. It's just been a lot of stuff, but super grateful. Managed to stay healthy through it all. I'm very grateful. So they're just a few things that have happened across the month, if you care. Anyway, one thing I've been thinking about recently is some thoughts around faith, community, the church. The last podcast, or one of the last ones I put up, last two I think, actually, I spoke about the if I was going to start a church, what would it look like, and then another podcast on the 500-year cycles of the church. So I'm back on that topic. There is I'm going to share some terms here that I'm going to assume you may know, but I'm going to just add a brief description around each of these so that we can tie some of this together. And as always, when I put these together, the talking helps me synthesize some of the things as well, this monologue. So, speaking about somebody's personal faith journey and stages of faith, and I've done a podcast on this, looking at the critical journey and the stages of faith. There's been a lot of work around what we might call stage theory or faith stage theory. A lot of this comes from a guy named James Fowler, who borrowed some developmental psychology frameworks and thought about how it looked in religious and faith practices across the world, mainly in Christianity. But those stages very quickly looked like stage one, coming to faith. You can think of that like being born. Stage two was the life of discipleship. You could think of that like, in childhood and schooling, attaching to charismatic leaders, listening, learning. Stage 3 was a life of service, which is kind of getting out there and participating and using your gifts and being part of the world. That's the life of service, stage 3. Stage 4 was the inward journey, the critical journey, the inward journey, which includes the wall. And this is usually where somebody, maybe a few decades into their faith life or so, has these some kind of crises, moral crises, physical crises, family crisis, social, something happens, and all the things they've been learning and serving around start not to add up. And you can think of these maybe like, what might happen as you get into your late teens and enter the workforce. You begin to realize everything you've learned and known from parents and teachers have to be ground out and apply into some difficult situations and real life situations. And we call it the critical journey, the inward journey, or the wall, or stage 4. You can go through that for decades. This is also, I should mention, commonly, not always, but commonly a stage of deconstruction or healing that somebody goes through. So deconstruction within the Christian sense, within the Christian faith sense, is often this deconstructing of what they've learned, what they've known of people and leaders and lessons in serving, etc., within their faith, and then that's deconstructed and has to re-emerge as something else, something personal, something less prescribed and more personal, which might lead you to stage 5, which is the outward journey. And here you are trying to find your way back again into the world, making sense of things, seeing what faith and church, faith communities, religion might look like for you. And then stage 6 would be the life of love, which is kind of an abandonment of all things and just having the maturity to fall into the love of God. Now, I've shared that a number of times in previous podcast episodes. You can look at that up in Stages of Faith and Critical Journey. Tied some of that to something else around life stages. But again, we're talking about developmental psychology, which is a kind of a major theme in some of the frameworks in Decenter Everything, the last book that I wrote and published in July 2025. So, that's a basic framework, several stages. That's been written in other ways as well. In simple change management terms, some of my scholarships in change management, research has been in that area, or change. We have Kurt Lewin, who put together this simple change management formula, or something that was adopted into change management, of something that's frozen, then unfrozen, and then refrozen. So you have Father Richard Rohr using these 3 containers of organized, disorganized, and reorganized as 3 things. You can have life, death, and resurrection. So you always have this middle stage of either we could call it death, we could call it being unfrozen, we can call it disorganized, but it's this chaotic liminal middle space where a lot of change occurs. And that is kind of this, what I described in the stages of faith before, as the stage 4, where everything's kind of melted down. We make sense and try and reform something of everything that has been done and said. All the certainty that we've had and been promised kind of melts down, and we're trying to put something back together that makes sense for us now in our new way. Now, of course, people can get stuck and refuse to move to stage 4 and refuse to unfreeze something, refuse to let go, refuse to change. That's an entire other kind of complex topic. Brian McLaren, in his Stages of Faith, uses these terms of simplicity is how you start your faith. Then you get complexity. You realize you have to integrate complex things and dynamics of your life into your faith. Then you have perplexity, where stuff stops making sense and you're like, what the hell's going on? And then finally you might move to humility. So there's a lot of frameworks that all kind of point towards, again, the same thing of having something that seems solid and certain, having something that becomes uncertain and unsure, and then reorganizing that into something that makes sense in a way, having gone through what you've gone through. So that's a very personal, inward, sociological, psychological, emotional kind of framework to do with faith or any kind of change, really. Nothing's really new there. We've just slapped 100 labels onto it. And sociologically, in society, we might also look at a similar change theory or adoption or stages that we go through society. And here's where I'll explain a tiny little bit here, or this is not really my great area of expertise. I haven't done a heck of a lot of research in there, but enough to feel confident enough to present it here. But you may have heard of the term modernism and then postmodernism as terms, maybe even pre-modernism. Modernism, very simply put, is the era that we moved into as a society kind of after the Reformation, after 1500, after the Enlightenment, after a whole lot of things that happened. Over the last 500 years, we moved into a time up until the turn of the previous century, largely where we felt we could be certain. Modernity was defined or marked by a sense of certainty, that science and progress and facts gave us a sense of great certainty, because before that we had a lot of animistic, non-scientific ways of thinking and worldviews. The way that we as a society at large, particularly in Western modern societies, were able to see how the world worked, and we could be certain of things. Understand that for many, many years we didn't have terms and understanding of gravity and the stars and the planets and all these things. A quick look at history will tell you that our worldviews, even the biblical, the worldviews that those who wrote much of what is the canonized scripture didn't think with a modern kind of mind. They didn't think with a scientific kind of mind. They didn't understand how the world, planet, and physics and all kinds of stuff worked. They had no idea that the stars were gaseous planets in a vast galaxy. They thought that, these were the sons of God that floated up there and shone brightly upon us. I know, a bit of a shock, right, that people thought did far differently than we did 2,000 years ago. And so what we also have is, we went from pre-modernity to modernity, where we could be sure of all these things. Yep, and certainty really reigned supreme. Now we have around 1900, very roughly, these are rough times, we moved into some postmodern times, and then that kind of heightened in the last sort of 50, 60 years or so. And we moved into what could be called postmodernity, where we begin to be aware of things that are complex. It's quite similar to that fourth stage of faith. We begin to go, okay, complexity is here. We may not be able to be certain. Things aren't just black and white. There is nuance. Maybe the things that we threw out in pre-modernity to adopt modernity are worth considering and keeping. And so this largely became a thing to consider, right? And so we've been in a real postmodern era now, and postmodern worldviews where things that we were all certain about, whether they were about how the world works, how physics work, how science should be done, but particularly how society should be run, all of that has been up for grabs. Whether we want to, if we have a whole lot of art, I should add too. Truck just went past. We had a whole lot of art and media, and a whole lot of stuff has been a large part of propagating postmodernism, that we can't be sure of everything, that doubt and absurdity and irony, and all these things are part of our world, and we can't just have one single unifying voice and authority tell us the way things are. And this has been necessary and part of it, and very much part of the world that we live in now. So that brings us to a place where we're maybe 100 years into postmodernity and finding our way here. But there's this kind of emergence now of thought, and around 2010 some people introduced this, I think it was 2010, introduced this term of metamodernism. And it's kind of the adoption of saying, okay, postmodernism, we've had this for maybe 100 years or so. This isn't necessarily working because we seem to be walking around a little aimlessly, uncertain of everything, unsure of everything. What do we hang our hat on if we've declared there's no hook? There's nothing certain here. And who then and what and could we trust in? It brings us back to the topic of the last podcast, which is what or who now is the authority? Because that was easy in modernism. Even in Christianity, in modern times, it was very much like, this is the scripture and this is truth, and we will run our lives and society upon our interpretations of the truth and adopt those with particular worldviews around this and their opinion of what truth is. We'll integrate that into our lives. But of course, we're not there anymore. There's a plurality of thought, plurality of options out there. And you can just look at anything from parenting to health and sexuality and religion. You know, we don't have one person say you shall all be heterosexual Christians who read this version of the Bible, follow these rules. That cannot be applied to the whole world. We cannot be certain of those things. Oh yeah, and by the way, you're all male. Yeah, that's gone. So we do live in a postmodern time. But this idea of metamodernity is creeping up, and this is a very long thought. So thanks for bearing with me. But this idea of metamodernity is coming up, and it is kind of saying, okay, postmodernity is not necessarily working as such. We can't live within this irony and within this uncertainty forever. What is it that we threw away in modernity that we can adopt now in postmodernity that is going to help us? Does and can this give us a clear and good and relevant, applicable way to move forward? And that term meta is kind of like an overview of all things. It's a zooming back over the top of post-modernity and modernity, and even pre-modernity, and being able to look over the top and say, okay, how can this apply to our life? And what is not being really talked a lot, because metamodernity is being talked about in arts and culture and other things, but not a lot in ecclesiastical, which means it's about the church, or theological terms. There are a few people like Matthew David Segal, who is a process and relational philosopher, speaks interesting about that, and a few others are exploring what metamodernity looks like. I think a challenge is that we had modernity go on for hundreds and hundreds of years, and post-modernity is only about 100 years old. So can you, and in its height, and not even, maybe even less than that, can we just jump forward and just grab a timeline and say we're in metamodernity now? And I don't know. There's arguments and discussions about this, but ultimately what we're talking about here, and I think this is my thoughts at the moment, is these are questions of something called epistemology, which is how we know that we know, or how we know what we know. It is sort of the question or the science or exploration, in a way, of how do you know what you know is the truth? Or how has it become about knowing? And I think we're in a really interesting stage now, and I'm going to tie what I opened with about the stages of faith and now these stages in society to some things that I'm noticing lately. I think we are definitely seeing what might have been a narrative amongst those who are and have been and moved through into deconstruction because of Christ, deconstruction of their faith because of personal crises, because of complexity, because of decades of moving in a particular way and era and belonging to church community, find themselves out of that for some reason. So we kind of have this a very large group of people, and some are disgruntled and some are not, but some people are in church and disgruntled and some are not. But you have, I think, a whole lot of people who are largely outside of practicing community of faiths, who are disenfranchised, somewhere on the spectrum between I've just left and I want to burn this place down to the other end of the spectrum, which is I have been on this journey with God to try and rediscover what life and faith looks like. But it's been very lonely. And so it's something I hear commonly in people that are going through deconstruction or reformation or faith or we might call a sanctification or a dark night of the soul or the perplexity stage, and they're like, I don't think I could walk into a standard church anymore, but dang it, I miss community. Or you will have people that really left over societal, sociological, sexual, including, say, the LGBTQ plus inability for a lot of churches to hold space for that community. Maybe they leave through because of conspiracy, through theological disagreements, whatever the reason people leave church is, and leave the certainty of a community like that and find themselves in this desert sort of liminal in-between space without a solid and certain and reliable community. What is very common, particularly those who have held on to a sense of faith and a sense of importance of faith, is a lot of them just feel lonely and they miss community. But for whatever reason, like all the things aforementioned, they can't be in there. So I kind of have thought about how that ties to belonging to most church and faith communities does require a kind of approach or epistemological approach, it's a big word again, or understanding or adherence to a set of rules, a set of rituals, a set of rites, a set of beliefs that all really work in modernity, all really work in a sense of certainty, all really work in a sense of maybe in simplicity and complexity, but do not work when there's perplexity, do not work when everything you've been taught and served and trusted falls apart. And so many stories come to mind from people that have been excommunicated from church because of their stand and their conviction and their connection to, say, the LGBTQI community, and whereas the larger church community that they're part of has said, no, we can't have that. Or, even people during COVID-19 who would or wouldn't wear a mask to church in a church community that would or wouldn't en masse agree that we should do this same thing, or questions about eschatology and end times and the end of the soul, whatever the reasons are. There are just so many of these people, some even just burnt out and washed out. Again, I think the churches we've known it on large has been formed and built around a bit of a modern approach. And of course, there's been some more emergence of churches and thinkings and people trying stuff out in the last few years to go, how could we do church around uncertainty and doubt and a postmodern approach? And I don't know if many have been really successful with that, and successful in the point where I would rate success within a church community, if it were at all possible, and I still don't know, but again, exploring this, could you have a faith in a church community that is both good, strong, and faithful for those that are at the start of their journey and definitely need discipleship and should learn and should have a container and should have certainty and should have structure and should have the strong kind of attachment a person needs as they grow up in a family that a child needs. Is a child needs that certainty, it needs that attachment. If you have some thoughts, understandings around attachment theory, you'll sort of get this, that schooling and families and all kinds of things that are there to onboard you into a way of thinking and being always best start with some fundamentals that are generally agreed upon and universal and homogenous. They're all kind of the same. So that's why you go to a faith community and say, here's the Nicene Creed, here's what we all believe, here's what we're moving towards. And so you have this, and it's the same with a family, you know, this is what parents look like, this is what dinner looks like, this is what life looks like, here's how we conduct ourselves, here's how we relate to each other. Because certainty breeds safety, even if that certainty looks like something dangerous. For example, people in child psychology will often tell you that a child would rather be beaten than ignored. They'd rather be loved than beaten, but they'd rather be beaten than ignored, because to be ignored and to have nothing and no certainty means that I'm unsafe and unattached and alone in this world. This is why a lot of people stay in abusive relationships or abusive homes or abusive churches, is because at least I know that if I do X, Y will happen, even if Y is destructive and traumatic. It's better than knowing that if I do X, I'll be alone, and I'm not sure. So I think we have a lot of people who their own inner lives have gone into this postmodern, uncertain, pluralistic, wide exploration, wide consideration movement internally, and that has wreaked havoc with their relationship with the church and others in community, whom I think are often, again, that system is rightly and understandably connected to kind of a modernity, a modern way of thinking around certainty. And because, again, we need that when we start. But as you progress and you mature and you get older and life becomes more complex and more nuanced, and we are invited to have expansive and fat souls, which is something I talk a lot about in my last book, is that we're invited to move beyond how do I say this? We're invited to go from modernism to perhaps a postmodernism complexity to what I would say is, and perhaps, and this is what I'm trying to kick around here, is a metamodern approach to life and faith, so that you might be able to, and perhaps there's an emergence of communities and faith communities and churches who, again, to get back to the point I did not long ago, might be able to hold a space and be a container for those who need all the certainty and those that are wrestling with uncertainty and need to reintegrate. In part, I don't think that is possible though. And I'll draw some sort of parallels here to schooling, which is really easy. If we think about life in a faith community, I would think about my own life. I got saved at 17. I came to know Jesus for the next decade, and then for the next decade after that, I just, into my 30s, Nat and I went and did missionary work overseas and really tried to carve out what actual service and giving our lives to these things would look like. And we did that for about another decade before we sort of hit our late 30s and early 40s, and a lot of things changed in our lives and things became far more complex, nuanced. And some of you know my story, have listened to previous podcasts, you know what some of that's about. And I know I'm certainly not alone in this. And a lot of people, maybe some of those listening, who've been on this similar journey of faith, have got to these moments of perplexity and old systems not working, and just attending regular church, which I love and missed and I'm grateful for, just isn't working for me. It causes more trauma, more harm, more perplexity. It's not good for my personal, mental, physical health. Or maybe church is dangerous because now I have changed and it's unsafe because people don't see things the way that I do, and I also refuse to deny myself or deny my convictions or deny genuinely where I feel God has taken me across my lifetime. And so you no longer enter it. I think, to get back to the point, is that you definitely need all the first three things in the church. You need a place where somebody might find God, might be discipled, and then along with others en masse through strong, certain, charismatic, safe and certain leaders and leadership, and a container, something solid to be in, and then you know what it's like to serve. But after that point, where usually that life of service and trying to flesh it out and follow and do what you feel you've called to do and be, you hit this moment where I'm going to say God pulls you apart or life tears you apart, and you no longer know the God of the breakthrough. You're trying to discover God in the breakdown, and it's very new within the context of some of your own dilemma and crises. Those first three stages, think of that as school. Think of that as kindergarten, primary school. You're learning to read and write. You're attaching to certain teachings. High school, as you go through, you here in Australia usually do the first 4 years of high school, having to, learn different things and try different things, but you still have your maths and your English and your sciences and all your fundamental subjects. And as you get a bit older, you can begin to go, I'd like to do health, I'd like to do cooking, I'd like to do history, I'd like to do biology. Depending on how and where you go to school, you get to choose some different subjects there. But then you leave school and you leave your friends and you leave the 9 till 3 o'clock sort of days. And my son's just going through this now, has finished high school. All these people that he'd see every day just are not there anymore, and you have to enter in the workforce, and you have to think about, well, do I study further? Do I go to college or university? What does the next part of my life look like? I'm turning 18, I can drive, I can drink, I can have sex legally, and all these things are open to you. You can travel overseas, you're a full independent human, and you've graduated. What do you do in those moments? And I think about that as this stage of faith where you've learned all the fundamentals you need to learn. Now, what are you going to do with them? Who are you going to be in the world? And that liminal in-between space, that deconstructive space, that removal from what is certain and a weekly and daily rites and rituals all move away, and the community you're part of, the learning community you're part of, is gone, and you're left, it's just you and your history and your current surroundings and a conviction and a spiritual walk with God. And there's a heck of a lot of uncertainty, and there's a heck of a lot of options, and there's a plurality of voices pulling you in each way. And that, I think, is more like postmodernity. So if you think of modernity as this sure sort of thing, which is similar to high school, similar to the first stages of faith and religious formation or personal formation, you have postmodernity where you're thrown out and thrust out into the world. Think about it as the hero's journey of somebody leaving the certainty, leaving the certainty of a tribe and going out into the world and adventuring by themselves. Eventually, that person has to find a new community, perhaps start a new family, build something new elsewhere, or maybe they come home different after many years. It's not necessarily that stage of seeking and finding and perplexity that I would relate to. I think that's can be related to postmodernist sort of thinking and exploration and lack of certainty, etc. And some people will long for the certainty. I know a lot of students at university where I teach are there because they don't know what else to do. They're not there because they know what to do. They're not sure what else to do. So they stay learning. It's like people who are repeat offenders. They go to jail for 10 years and they repeat offend because jail gives them a sense of certainty. So they want to go back to where they are. There's no judgment there. The church is full of people who grew up in church and just never dared to or wanted to explore anything else. So they're locked in and they didn't move or budge, and they try their best, and my hat off to them. Like, if they're able to do that. But there are some that can't and some that won't, and some that it's too dangerous and too much for. So metamodernism then, I would suspect, looks a little bit like a whole other school and gathering. So yeah, let me go back to what I was talking about. I'm a bit all over the place, but if you had school and those first year of church and modernity, etc., all be kind of similar, with a linchpin of certainty in all kinds of ways, then postmodernity around uncertainty and irony and plurality of things. I don't think you could have you can't keep people in school forever. So I think if we think about this as far as spaces and places, I don't know if the current church could both be a primary school, a high school, and a village of families, and a multi-school, multidisciplinary college, university, TAFE, and workplace, and bedrooms and dorms all in one. You can't squeeze all those things into one. It is, there are certain things that Natalie and I talk about and do in the bedroom that are simply not for the dinner table with our kids, if I can put it that way. And what you don't want to do is throw uncertainty and perplexity in the face of those looking for certainty. Morning. This is why you see some pastors and leaders that are going through deconstruction really struggle with leading the church and doing so faithfully. Morning. Walkers on the path. I just don't think it's possible. I'm going to be honest. I don't think you can have a church that does all the stages of faith that can hold modernity, postmodernity, and maybe even explorations into metamodernity, where it's taking the best of both. It's actually saying, I can't be part of a normal church, but I still want community. You can't have all that in one space. And so I think there has to be other spaces where you might be able to practice and safely be in the later stages of faith. But I think it looks different, and I think about how in the podcast when I talked about the kind of faith community or church I would be part of or lead, I think we move away from the sage on the stage and we move to discussion we move to open sharing, we move to humility, we move to fleshing this out and supporting each other to flesh out what this looks like in ourselves. And you would do that best in a circle and not from a stage. You would do that interrelationally. You would do that within a safe and easy container with lots of options, but you would not demand of it in the same way you used to before. And in this way, I think this maybe new imagined metamodern church that has moved through certainty, uncertainty, and is now looking into what does it look like to walk in humility forward, maybe even, as I talk about in my book, what it looks like to be parenting and particularly eldering in this stage, is how do we make room for others and be sojourners and companions on a journey instead of guides, instead of leaders. Instead of going leaders and followers, how do we walk together? How do we come together and converge and emerge differently to the spaces and ways in life in which God has called us to? So you think about a circle of people that come together to talk and discuss, encourage and support one another, and then to go off go off and practice life within this community. And I really think that, just talking out loud here, that's not just a metamodern kind of epistemological approach, a philosophical approach. It is something that other communities, indigenous communities and others have been doing for eons, but in our Western industrialized rows instead of circles, stages instead of circles sort of era, we traditionally have thought that in order to move forward, I need to continually find the kind of voices and characters and leaders up the front to lead. I need a power structure. I need people that are smarter and wiser and ahead of me. I need people who are authority figures to continually tell me how and how I might not do things. And in a metamodern narrative, or perhaps a second half of faith and or life narrative, we are we're approaching it collectively. We're approaching it in a flatter way. We are approaching it more democratically. We are not following somebody down the path, but supporting each other's as we're walking our own paths, or we're at least converging in the middle of the maze to go and find our own pathway out of the maze. We're meeting in the center of the city and to discuss things, and then going back into our homes and fleshing those things out. And so the strength and support in this kind of thing comes from both embracing some of the uncertainty and plurality and even irony and complexity and perplexity that comes with postmodern approaches, life and thinking, etc. But then also borrowing from modernity the certainty and some of the safety that comes with all agreeing on some fundamental truths around belonging and safety and curiosity and connectedness and support and companionships and dignity that transcends and includes things around social ethics, spiritual ethics, sexual ethics. As I said before, beliefs, epistemology, conspiracies, even theological, philosophical aspects, is that you can come together, transcend, include all of those things as you sit in circle and discuss. But the modernity, the certain part is that you can come together and be certain that it's a safe place to bring yourself. And I think that's the kind of community. I think that happens incidentally over in coffee shops, in home churches, in small gatherings. And I've wondered if that sort of thing could be blueprinted or templated in a way that it could be replicated and adopted elsewhere. And I think of a lot of models, whether they're sports clubs or recovery groups like AA and Al-Anon and NA and all these things that have been around for many years. They have some basic tenets. Their tenets not only include things with a sense of certainty and modernity, but they also exclude being certain on things that should stay uncertain. And they almost take this metamodern approach. Now, if you bring 10 people together and you change one of those 10 people together in that circle changes. So we understand that this is living and organic and changes and evolves and is always in process and evolving. But at any time, the kind of framework of circle and sharing and support, accountability, reliability, boundaries keep you together. And I think if love and understanding is at the center of that well and everybody's there with some things that an agreed approach or an agreed epistemology or an agreed focus, and then also agree to disagree and avoid things that they know they won't agree on, or that people are going to be at a different stage of their faith or journey. I think something like that can work. I think something like that is perhaps an expression of the theories and discussions around metamodernism, but from an ecclesiastical, church-based, theological, spiritual development sort of perspective. I go to a men's circle every couple of weeks where men just sit around, and for half an hour, we do a check-in. We share from the heart. We do stuff we share spontaneously. And it's a safe space, and the rules are really simple. And only one person talks at a time. Person who has the talking stick talks. And everyone else listens, and you stay in your lane, and you only use I statements, and you don't comment or crosstalk on other people's shares. You just have a place that you are seen and heard. And after that, you might have some discussion and go out for coffee. And what emerges. The same thing as the deaf cafes that I've been part of and hosting. We sit in circles, we have some prompts, some basic rules, a container, and we sit in circles and we talk about our experience and thoughts in and around death. And there's something really beautiful about that. I think there's something necessary about that. And it does eliminate loneliness. It does undo that. It does undo some of this isolation. And so maybe you're listening to this and you don't have a group like that. Find one. It may actually be in a place you don't know. It might be in an AA group. It might be at a death cafe gathering. It could be in a small home group. It could be that you want to start something with some friends and you just say, hey, for 5 or 6 weeks, can we get together? There's some things I'd like to discuss. We could do this. Maybe you find some people online. Be somebody who brings some of these people together, and one week you might have a lot and others you may not, but you just stick with it and see who turns up, and you might be surprised who's with you on the journey, who you connect with, who you learn from, etc. Well, that was a very long kind of talk with lots of cars and interruptions, and would love to hear your thoughts around some of this, if you have any, or if you understood a word that I said. All right, peace and love. Bye.